Hello guys, this is my Naya equipment deck, or my Naya belt deck, evolving around the Belt of Giant Strength in a sense. It's not only about that, but that's one of the main cards. This is a 2-mana artifact that gives one of your creatures base power and toughness 10/10, which is of course really good, but the downside is that it has equip 10. This ability costs X less to activate, where X is the power of the creature it targets. So this can be enabled in a couple of ways. Either you just cast a creature that is big by itself or that grows, and then you can equip it in the late game, or you have ways to make the creature very big very fast, like Michiko's Reign of Truth. This is a 2-mana enchantment that gives one of your creatures +1/+1 until end of turn. We don't need that. Equal to the number of artifacts and or enchantments you control. Reminds of like Nettlecyst maybe, and sees play in Historic. It's just a really strong enchantment for that kind of thing, which is pretty much hitting fast and hard, and for in that sense rewarding you for playing a bunch of artifacts or enchantments. We are focusing on artifacts in this deck, so that's one way, but that's not the best way. Of course, maybe you have already seen them. Kemba's Outfitter and Kemba himself are perfect with the Belt of Giant Strength. This card, when it enters the battlefield, lets you target an equipment which you either have already in play or in your hand, and then it gets perpetually equip 1. So that's pretty good with the belt, I think. And then Kemba himself can attach any equipment that is already in play to himself without paying any mana cost. So that lines up pretty decent with the belt as well. You can also go down in the numbers. I tried this before. You can also play less belts, maybe one more of the sledge. I think this is definitely something you can play around with. This is what I was trying most in the end, I think. The Hexgold Sledge is one of the new Alchemy cards that got released in the last set. This basically conjures a card named Goblin Cavalier onto the battlefield, which gets +2/+0 for each equipment that is attached to it. So that's actually another way to maybe trigger the belt fairly easily, because it just needs one more additional equipment with, let's say, giving it also +1, like a Rabbit Battery, and then it is, for example, already at 7 power, needing only 3 more mana to equip the belt to it. But you also get a 2/2 token because it has the 4 Mirrodin ability as well, which is a 3/1 basically, because the equipment gives +1/+0. So that's just a really cool 2-for-1 and lines up also decently versus a popular deck in the format like Mono Red, because you put just 2 bodies on the board as soon as turn 3. But it's also decent versus control your decks, of course, because you get 2 bodies and one of them can be very big on its own, meaning the Cavalier. Then you have another really good, I think, card in the deck, which is Yotia Declares War. This basically puts an enchantment and an artifact into play by creating an 0/2 colorless Thopter artifact creature with flying onto the battlefield with its first stage, and then is an enchantment itself. So I think it's really perfect to combine this with Michiko's Reign of Truth if possible. And the second stage is then basically also a removal spell. So technically you have 8 removal spells in the deck, but this is a removal spell which creates a artifact and enchantment and can also hit for 4/4 in the end with the third stage. So I think this is really nice, because imagine you deal at least 4 damage with your removal spell to decontrol your deck. So that I think is really nice. And the Thopter having flying, of course, is also really relevant with both Michiko's and the belt. It's not like the hammer, the 1-mana hammer from Historic, because that makes it lose flying. Yeah, you can still attack for a lot of damage in the sky, which I think you could also see in the games. And then we just have a bunch of 1-mana equipments in there. This is mostly the case because of Kemba, because of course this is a 2-mana card and you want to use its ability to attach an equipment to it when it enters the battlefield. Rabbit Battery makes a lot of sense, makes him basically a 4/4 haste creature that attacks right away, because he gives equipped creatures +1/+1. Then this is really relevant versus a deck like Mono Red, or any deck that tries to race you in the mid or late game too, because you gain Lifelink and Death Touch. And then you have the Prosthetic Injector. This is, I think, relevant because most of the removal spells in Alchemy Best of 1, at least from what I have experienced, are like a toughness reduction orientated. So either red removal spells from like Mono Red, or any deck with red like Molten Impact or something, or like black minus effects, like the malicious, I don't know, like the Cry of the Canarium effect that got released in Kamigawa. Each creature gets -2/-2 effect, which black decks really like to run in Alchemy, mostly Dimir in that format, which is really popular because of Mono Red, I think. And especially Dimir also runs Tasha. Tasha is a planeswalker that can give each attacking creature a -1/-1 counter of the opponent. by just plussing, which is really good, of course, versus deck like Mono Red, which have a lot of creatures with 1 toughness, but it can also line up pretty decently versus us. So this is a way to protect you against cards like this. But also, of course, this is pretty nice with Kemba, especially versus Mono Red, because if this enters, it's basically a 3/5, and that's not so easy to overcome for Mono Red if you play this on your turn 2. And then you have, of course, some 1 mana interaction, which is really good for both increasing your Michiko's count, but also for having as many artifacts as possible for Yotia Declares War. Yeah, so those two really want you to play as many cheap artifacts as possible, ideally already as soon as turn 1. And another great one, of course, is Skrelv Defector Mite, which is a 1 mana artifact creature that cannot block, but you can protect your creatures with that as soon as it loses summoning sickness, which can be a downside. So it's not like a selfless savior, but obviously it lines up really well in this deck, protecting our creatures, especially if they are getting or about to get really big with Michikos, or same with the belt. Maybe some additional informations about the belt. When you made it cheaper with Kemba's Outfitters, then has equip 1, and if you have a second one, because obviously you can draw multiples and this might appear to be bad, but what you can just do, and I also think this comes up in the games, that you can just equip one of your creatures with the equip 1 belt and then cast the other belt, equip it for free, right, because it has already at least 10 power, and then you can equip the second belt for free to that creature. But then you can just use, you don't have to do this in the same turn, of course, and then you can just choose the mana reduced belt for 1 mana and just equip it to another creature. So this is a way just to use the other belt even if it's not reduced. And there are some other things. I have also made a short on the channel where I make one of the belts with the Yotia Declares War chapter 3 into a creature and then equip the other one to it. So there are some cool things you can be doing, and yeah, obviously you can also play this in best of 3, but then I would play some Revel Salvos main deck, get out some portable holes, don't go too much on this Kemba belt thing, and if it's certain that you play versus a very mid-rangey deck, which is happening most of the times probably, then I would really recommend to bring in cards like after Sideboard like Sarah Paragon or the Aster, or some Blade Road Cleavers, which is a new card from the last set, because they are all CMC 4 and have 4 toughness, so they don't get hit by Brotherhood's End, which of course is a popular card to bring against us. But yeah, link is in the description, you can check the deck list out. And I also have another version with Maria that will be coming up in the games. Let's look at that real quick. I also was playing Patchwork Automatum in there. This is also like one of my pet cards when it comes to artifact decks. I think this is also definitely a version you can play in both best of 1 and best of 3. But as I said, with the changes for the best of 3 format, Maria is really cool in an equipment deck especially. I think we're not running too many equipments, so I don't think it's absolutely perfect, but it's still very good, I think, because you can use those equipments without any downside basically. So you can tap an untapped non-token artifact, which is the case for equipments, right? It does not work with the Declares War token, but with each other equipment basically, I think. So you can tap an untapped artifact and then you can add either 1 mana, or you can tap in the late game, especially if you're running out of cards, right? Just tap 2 equipments or artifacts in general to then exile the top card of your library and play this turn. So it's like, so it functions like as a card draw engine in the late game as well, which I think is just really good. And it also just helps you just equipping the belt normally in a sense, because you often just have so much mana laying around. So yeah, it can just do it that way, and that's really good. So you will basically see both versions of these decks in the games, and yeah, now I think it's time to hop into some of those games and see what the deck does. Let's do it.